the question, should we help? Sorry.
Okay, let's do it. So are we morally obligated to help others? We can start with this question, and then if we get bored of this question, we can always start a different question in a bit. But what do you guys think about this this question?
I think we should help other people.
Yes, but are we morally obligated?
I think so. I think it's the wise course. And now that doesn't mean that we provide for everybody.
Right.
It may be that we help somebody learn how to provide for themselves, but yeah, we should.
Is it being wise the same as being obligated?
Yeah, I don't think it is. Right.
We're saying that when you help others, it benefits you, but that doesn't mean you're morally obligated. Yeah.
Well, moral obligation is something that you decide, not something that you know, is imposed from somewhere on you. That's what I think,
From my
I'm thinking of I'm thinking of what morally obligated means in this context. Like no one's expecting you to, I guess.
Yeah, if I would take the question of moral obligations seems to hold the premise that there is some sort of objective source of morality. That doesn't necessarily mean that morality itself is always this constant and objective, but it does, it does suggest that there is some sort of a objective pattern to it, as opposed to simply it's up to the individual.
Mm-hmm. Because for some people, moral obligation means exactly the same as God commands you, right? And so it's an external thing, and if you are not a theist, then what is the source of moral strictures? Who declares what is moral or not? And if it's you, then the moral obligation is not something that you receive from outside you, but it's something that you decide.
You could also be a deontologist and believe that it's logic makes it necessary that certain things are moral and immoral, and therefore it's dictated by just logic itself. It's you're not deciding this, it's just the only course of action that logic allows. Logic demands that the alternative course of action is immoral.
I'm very skeptical of that, but yeah. But I think I view everything as people do what they do. People do help each other, right? Even when it's not necessarily in their own personal best interest. In many situations, people are altruistic. They do things to help others, but not always. So it's sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's kind of a spectrum. What degree do you help other people? Very few people are always selfish. I don't know, maybe there's some people that they're always selfish. Very few people are always generous. Most people are somewhere in between. And what the right balance is, that's the hard question. Yeah. But yeah.
I think, Michael, in your, in that spectrum of what we arrived at, I think the balance at least was at the point at which it allowed the species to continue to,
that's
to
the sweet spot. Yeah.
That's probably where we are now, just enough.
I think we should promote human flourishing, and we may disagree on the best way to do that.
Right.
But that's what.
Yeah.
That's what obligates us.
Right. I think there's just enough.
Michael doesn't obligate me. I obligate.
Yeah. There's just enough helping other people to keep us from going extinct, and maybe enough for us to progress.
Well, I have here on the background, you guys can probably see the modern version of the Good Samaritan tale.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this question reminded me obviously of the story of the Good Samaritan, which has a strong religious connotation. And I wonder if this idea that we need to help other people, if that is connected necessarily to religion and to the Christian canon, moral canon.
No, I think it's more universal than that. I think most other religions also have talk about helping other people, and especially those who are not necessarily your own kind.
I think a lot of the debate, like we hear in politics nowadays, it's like ideally, like there's helping the people that were unfortunate or unlucky, and then there's helping people that were lazy or belligerent or whatever. So like a lot of the debate are people who are like impoverished or in an unfortunate situation, were they lazy, like did they have qualities that we inherently think are just bad character traits, or were they unlucky, they just didn't grow up in good circumstances, etc. And so I think a lot of the debate in politics is around that. I tend to think people are usually like unlucky, like, or they just didn't grow up in the greatest environment or whatever. But whenever you try to help people like that, inevitably you'll have some people that do have those bad character traits. Like for example, if you if you offer unemployment benefits, let's say, most of the people that you're giving the benefits to might be actually like unlucky, or maybe they got laid off for reason XYZ that wasn't their fault. But then you're helping a little bit that genuinely might be taking advantage of the system, or pretending that they're applying for jobs when they're really not. And so I think that's a lot of debate.
What I think confuses the public is that when politicians debate this, both sides use anecdotes as if it's data.
Yeah.
And it's not.
No. And they know that. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I do think they know that by and large.
Yeah, it's meant to really rile up feelings. Yeah.
It's like this. Well, it's unrelated to this question, but I think it's crazy. This is a good example of how political discourse in the United States right now is completely messed up. It's this whole Virginia elections thing, and the number one issue was the critical race theory. Isn't that what it's called? Critical race theory, right? And which is absolutely a non-issue in Virginia because it's not taught anywhere in Virginia. So and that was like the number one like speaking point of Republicans, and obviously Democrats had to spend time like rebuffing that and all that. But it shows you like how absurd it is that they're talking about something that is a non-issue in the first place, because it's never been taught in Virginia. Like all the education people have said that repeatedly, and they've spent not most of their time, but a good part of their time talking to people while campaigning, talking about something that is simply not even an issue, which is crazy. So they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They're trying to gain votes, and if they need to spread misinformation, they'll do it.
It kind of depends a lot of times on what gets promoted, is trendy. And for example, you guys are probably familiar now, there's this push to reduce the use of plastic straws. So we come out with these paper straws or the reusable straws and all of that. And all of that stems from the idea that there's too much plastic, single-use plastic, and I agree with that. But the push on the straw thing was traced back to an interview with an 8-year-old boy who was talking about plastic, and he said something like, we throw away 5 million straws a day. And that's not true. So we have a law now, or many states and municipalities have laws or regulations based on the hyperbole of an 8-year-old. I don't get that. Yeah. I mean, trying to solve plastic by limiting our use of plastic straws is like trying to save the Amazon rainforest by limiting our use of toothpicks. It just doesn't make sense.
All right.
It's also worth mentioning, at least, because usually what people bring up nowadays in environmental circles are carbon production. People like back when I was growing up, it was all about like plastic in the ocean, but now it's all about the carbon footprint. And while producing plastic does indeed have a carbon footprint, compared to like alternatives, like one of the major alternatives that people have been doing are metal straws. Metal straws have a much higher carbon footprint, and most people still throw them away.
Right.
And
metal straws will become a controversial thing when the first person who trips and falls on his face while drinking from a metal straw pierces his skull.
Oh yeah.
Be a controversy for that person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's or similarly, I don't remember the exact figure, but I think like one of those recyclable like tote bags that you can get at a grocery store.
Yeah.
It would require 100 uses of those to equate it, you throwing out the plastic bag each day. And now people, as far as I know, don't really throw out those bags, but usually they forget about them, they leave them behind. And those bags also deteriorate, they get holes in them, and then they throw them away.
So,
it's
well.
and you in theory could reuse the plastic ones.
Right. Then I made up for it with my reusable supermarket bag. Had it for, I don't know, 8 years now or whatever. But yeah.
So Raul, going back a little bit, so you're talking about how different religions, it's not just Judeo-Christian culture, it's also other religions across the world and other cultures. They have this thing that you should help people. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's something that you find across different communities?
I think because it agrees with most people's general sensibilities.
Golden rule.
Yeah, I mean, the religions, from my point of view, are human creations, and if you are a religion who promotes people killing their children, or every other child that they have, that's not going to flourish. That religion will lose any followers that if it was even able to garner any followers, convince any followers. So religion has to, a term I've read used is should bend but not break your sort of core sensibilities or beliefs, and so that's why I think it's prevalent in pretty much all the major religions, in Buddhism, and it's
because so you're saying it's prevalent in all those different religions and communities because it's socially beneficial.
No, because it's the way most people feel in the first place. I think I believe the source of morality is basically, yes, the golden rule or feelings of empathy. I think it's built in. It's evolutionarily adaptive. because a society that exercises, that has empathy, people with empathy for each other is more likely to continue on than one that doesn't.
And I think it's worth mentioning that even religions or cultural practices, which may not seem from the outside at first glance to follow that trend, often include certain cosmological or metaphysical perspectives that, if taken at face value, could be argued to be compatible. So, for example, if you believe, let's say, every time you kill someone in a ritual sacrifice, they go to heaven.
Right.
You're helping them, right? And if that ritual sacrifice also means you're going to get a good harvest that year, you're helping the society. So it's easy, even though from the outside you might say, man, how does just killing a random person on a stone slab help anybody? But if the society is willing to accept those cosmological perspectives,
right,
well, that absolutely helps
everybody.
And so it's very easy.
So let me make sure I understand. Are you saying that anything that the majority of society wants is right? I'm not following you.
I'm not saying that it's right, but I'm saying is you can follow the justification or how you can follow how something which may seem incompatible with one's sensibilities can actually be moved to be compatible.
Yeah, so, it's right within their belief system.
Right. It's within a particular framework. Now we may come up and say their framework is wrong, so therefore the conclusions they draw are also wrong. But if they're in a hypothetical world, a metaphysical, where their framework was correct, well, then yeah, if it were actually true that a human sacrifice was required in order to have enough food to feed the rest of society, it's sacrifice. Then if that were actually true, then you'd be choosing from a let's say a utilitarian perspective, just to make things easy, between the life of that one person and then the suffering of the rest of society. Well, that becomes a much easier choice to make, especially if the person you're killing is going to heaven. So when we're saying that those things are wrong, we're saying it because we're arguing that their framework is wrong. What they're doing is based off of a faulty premise, multiple faulty premises. And that's fine for us to challenge. I'm not saying that it's all abstract and they have their views and we have ours. There's not, I do believe if you strongly believe that they're hurting people, then yes, you should challenge that.
Yeah.
But so you can follow again the path of reasoning, and that's the point I am trying to make.
Yeah.
You're just saying people might do bad things not out of character flaws, but because they have flawed belief systems in the first place.
Yeah, so people do bad things from our point of view.
Yeah. So let's say you think hamburgers are really healthy because everyone tells you they're really healthy and you've read articles that they're really healthy and you don't know anyone else who has an opinion on the matter. So let's say you feed your kid 3 hamburgers a day and you think you're being a good parent because you think they're healthy. So your motivation is good. You're just wrong about the science, or you're just uneducated, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we've never been wrong about the science.
We've never been wrong about science. Yeah.
No, if you're confronted with such a case, then what's the remedy? Then you try to convince the person by giving him better information. But what if that person is basically, nope, this is what I believe, and there's nothing you can do to change my mind? Then that's, if he's a part of a society that in general believes that what he's doing is a form of mistreatment of his children, then it depends on what society feels it can do in terms of intervening or in the parenting decision. But these are all problems of ethics and morality that have persisted since long time ago.
So it's nice, and most societies feel that it's a good thing that we help others. But do we actually have a moral obligation? Like, are we obliged as individuals to help others while we're in this world? Or is it just something nice? It's like a nice bonus, or is it really an obligation for everybody to go out there and try to do something positive for others?
I think the real question is, are we obliged to do anything at all? Because I feel like if you think you're obliged to do anything at all, you probably think that you're obliged to help at least some people, at least some deserving people in a difficult situation. So the real question is, are we obliged to do anything?
I guess the difficult part comes into play when you can't tell the difference between those who deserve it and those who are lazy.
Yeah. And I think that's the big controversy is some people like to, like just look at it black and white. Some people like to say, everybody, some people like to say that everyone who's not doing well, it's because they don't deserve good things in life because they're lazy, they don't try, they're unethical, whatever. And then some people say everybody who's in an unfortunate situation got unlucky, they went through a tough situation, it wasn't their fault, when in fact it's a mix of the two. And yeah, I feel like it's just a silly debate. But
I could be wrong, but
yeah,
I believe that most people in the world are good.
I believe it too. Yeah.
And there are several reasons that I believe that. One is that the murder rate has been cut almost in half in the last 38 years. That's dramatic.
Yeah.
A 50% reduction in the murder rate.
Right.
Also,
but David, the problem with that is because you can say, well, the murder rate has decreased, but I can easily tell you, and maybe you have a good response to this, but I don't think people are not killing other people necessarily because they're good. They might not be killing other people because they'll go to jail if they kill other people.
That could be, but I recently heard about a study that was done where they took wallets with several $100s in each wallet, or whatever the currency was, and they dropped them in cities all over the world. Over 90% of them were returned with the money.
Mm-hmm.
Mine wasn't, but the study, I believe. See, you can't go by the anecdote.
And yours wasn't exactly. And yours wasn't just dropped.
Yeah. But mine, I didn't. Mine, I did get it back. Just not the money.
It just seems to me like there has been, I don't know what the percentage is, but there has been a dramatic reduction in wars and death from wars over the last 75 years. I mean, precipitous reduction. That doesn't mean that we don't have any problems, doesn't mean that people aren't murdered, but it does mean that we, somewhere between absolutely horrible and the ideal, we can't get to the ideal without going through where we are now.
Yeah.
Well, but they're also, I don't know about that, because if you look at the 20th century, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park, for a lot of people in the world.
No, true.
Yeah. That's right.
It was a pretty bloody century.
I'm not even remotely suggesting that it was great, but
it was great for some people.
I am suggesting that humanity on the whole has made dramatic progress.
Yeah, that's from Steven Pinker's book, and he's had some detractors about the data he's using, but he's basically saying it's a percentage.
Craig says that Pinker manipulated some data.
Yeah.
And he provided some articles, but none of the articles pointed out any data that was manipulated.
Right.
So there may be some information out there, but I don't know where it is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just the raw numbers of deaths from violence, human inflicted violence as a percentage of total world population.
But that really depends on how you look at the data. Because if you just look at the data of people murdered in the 20th century, that's probably more people murdered than people murdered in the history of humankind before.
That's true, right? But the population is also greater. So as a proportion of population, he's able to show a downward trend.
In the 20th century?
Yes, and no, throughout history, from the worst time was during Genghis Khan. That's what he's
sure. If that's your baseline, I mean,
but
that's not a very
throughout
test, right?
Throughout history. You just remember that you can't even walk from one town to another in medieval Europe without, fear of being, set up on by outlaws and bandits. That was life then, and in more primitive tribal societies, hunter-gatherer societies, like for example in New Guinea, if you walk in through the territory of this or that band, they can kill you, and it's accepted that that's their standard of morality. That if you stray into the wrong area, they'll kill you. Or there's a high percentage that you'll get killed.
Well, that's fine. I mean, my only point, and you can try to come to some conclusions, with that sort of form of reasoning. My point was just that looking at our recent history, and our recent history, I think, is the history of the 20th century, because the 21st century is very much just in the beginning. The 20th century was not, I wouldn't say it was a very moral century where there were we didn't really see people being evil. I think we saw plenty of evil.
And I'm not 100% endorsing Steven Pinker.
Well,
we'll find
I
out
will
later
leave
on.
open the possibility that he manipulates data.
Yeah.
If somebody will provide me with an example of data he manipulated, and I have not seen that.
Well, I think the data, it's not even about manipulating data. It's just how you look at it. It's just how you look at it. Like if you look at the 20th century and you say, well, this is proof that we're doing a lot better as a species. Well, there are some ways in which you can say that. And there are also ways in which you cannot.
The 20th century is not the proof.
What is the proof?
The trend is the proof. And the trend is much bigger than the 20th century.
Yeah. I mean, there's blips and,
photograph. From today.
But then you would have to see how many years you're using, right? And that's what I'm saying. And depending on how many years you're using, depending on how many centuries, decades, then you're going to get different conclusions. Like if we use only the last 20 years, we might get some pretty good conclusions globally.
Yeah.
The larger of a gap you use, the generally better you can see whether a trend exists or not.
I agree.
Looking at things, let's say from the time of Genghis Khan, which is a pretty long time ago, to today, you're going to have a pretty significant range of time. And sure, some of that will go a little bit higher, some of it will go lower. But if you're seeing a very clear pattern in the data, or when using
what's the pattern though? That's what I'm asking. Like the pattern is that everything got better since that time.
It's a downward trend, yeah. In terms of death from human inflicted violence as a proportion of total population.
In terms of
per capita.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also in terms of average life expectancy,
Yeah.
that has gone up. Infant mortality has gone down.
Well,
That especially
certainly, but those are things that's certainly true. But those are things that are not due to people being nice.
No, that's
medicine will explain that.
And yet, accessibility to medicine.
Yeah, working on medicine, scientific research is not nice at all.
Mhm.
Well, does the fact that we try to do medicine, does that prove that people are good?
Jonas Salk toiled in obscurity until he found a vaccine for polio. Nobody knew who he was.
No.
Yeah, the only thing I wonder is the worst aspects of life have been mitigated substantially over the past 100 years. So like death, disease, poverty, and actually it's much easier to objectively quantify the bad things than the good things. So the bad things like life expectancy, infant mortality, maybe health to some extent, are very easy to, or easier, not very easy, to objectively quantify. The good things in life are more difficult to objectively quantify. So it's harder to do studies around them or stuff like that.
Yeah. Allow me to put it this way. This is a story that my dad told me. He said that if you had a room that was absolutely full to the ceiling with cow manure, and you shoveled and you washed and you scrubbed and you polished until the room was absolutely glistening white, except for one little pile in the middle of the room. If somebody walked into that room, they're going to notice that pile. They're not going to see all the work you did. And I think that's what we're doing with time. That we see that there remains a problem, and we're assuming that everything was always this bad.
Well, no. So I'm saying, so I understand this. So what if, and I'm not saying this is the case, I'm just doing a thought experiment. What if the bad things went down and down and down and down, but the good things went down and down and down and down? I'm not even saying that I'm not even saying that's actually what happened. I'm saying could that be hypothetically possible?
I don't see how you can characterize the reduction in murder rate as both a good thing and a bad thing. No.
I'm saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying the bad things went down over time. I think that's very clear.
But also it has to be
said. Maybe it would help if you gave me an example.
Oh, I'm saying maybe things like social interactions or like connections with your tribe members or like more subjective things. What if those have gone down over time?
Right, and it's really difficult to quantify something like that.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify. See, the bad things can be quantified more easily. Like murder rates, you can track those, and those clearly have gone down. You can look at poverty.
Well, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure murder rates have actually gone down. Like we're assuming
absolutely
that's true.
They have.
Well, yes, but where did they go down? Because there's a lot of places in the world that the murder rates have increased substantially, like in recent decades.
Worldwide.
Well, if you're looking at Latin America, for example, I would be very surprised if they went down in
doesn't mean there aren't pockets where
in recent history.
I mean, it's not a smooth incline. It's a roller coaster ride.
It's kind of similar to how you can't discount global warming because one place had a really, really bad snowstorm, a record snowstorm.
No,
right?
But I'm talking about a clear tendency, like a clear tendency of murder rates going up and not down throughout decades in a substantial like part of the world. That's what I'm talking about. Like I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but But I mean, if you look at Latin America's murder rates, I mean, it's not very good, and it's not improving.
It's higher than other places in the world, but I don't think there's. I guess I haven't seen this data limited to Latin America, but I'm.
Well, what about the Middle East?
Find out that it's increasing.
What about the Middle East as well? Do you think the murder rates have gone down in the Middle East? I mean, I think it would be interesting to see the actual data.
I can't say anything more definitive than worldwide, global.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I could speculate, and my speculation would be, if I had to put money on one or the other, I would put it on it going down, but it'd be speculation.
Yeah, just the very fact that the worldwide rate has gone down means that it's the places where it's getting better is enough to swamp the effect of the places where it's getting worse. So would be unfortunate for a person who happens to live in a place where it's getting worse, but the trend is downwards. And if it's going down, then maybe what works in those places where it's going down might be able to transfer that in the other places that could use more improvement. But so
I like Michael's question. Are we obliged to do anything at all? This is backtracking. But maybe don't listen to me, because I always I always backtrack when it's these moral questions, because I have the fundamental problem that, well, essentially what Michael asked: are we obliged to do anything? Are there
obliged
morals
by
at all?
Obliged by whom? By society, or by our conscience, or by,
I don't know,
by some person in the sky?
I shouldn't guide too much, because I'll put us in a hole. So
I actually appreciate you using this, Bruno, though, because I mean, I feel like we also have a tendency to, I mean, this is only the second one I've shown up to, so maybe I don't have enough data points to know what the tendency is. But we definitely, at least this time and the other time I've been here, we have a tendency to go on tangents, which are very interesting. But sometimes you just want to go back to the heart of the question. And I actually did want to comment on that, because right now we're talking about moral obligation, but we do sometimes use obligation in other contexts. So for example, a contractor for construction may be obligated, based off of his licensing, based off of legal requirements and building code, to do certain things as part of his profession. It's not that it's a moral obligation per se, but he's being held accountable. There's something that said this is what you ought to do, and when you're doing X, he is doing X, knowing those standards, so therefore he is obligated to follow them. And it's not necessarily the same as, like, are you obligated to follow every law that exists? That's I think it's related but a slightly different question, but a sense of, to me anyway, what the standards are, what's expected in the circumstance. You are choosing to engage in that circumstance, knowing those expectations, and therefore you are obligated, even if you don't necessarily think the standards are reasonable. Does that obligation also exist? So it's not exactly the same thing as you choosing, for yourself, like, I think I ought to do this, so I will. The standards are being set elsewhere, but you're still choosing to interact with it in such a way that that you're expected to meet those expectations, and I think that's sufficient to call obligation.
We're creeping into free will.
we are.
Example.
Well, no, we're not really creeping into free will, because
but because from what I'm gathering, then you're saying that the obligation is really from us.
No. Well, it's not. No, I'm not saying it's. I'm actually saying to the contrary. Like, it is not a matter of.
Because you can choose to.
Okay. I think this is going back to the discussion. This is where compatibilism is important, because it's still completely acceptable to use words such as you taking action and choice, while operating on an otherwise deterministic framework. I think the point is this is the action taken. It is taken not because you are being coerced into this by some unseen forces. It is taken because you want to. Goes back to that, right? So whatever the reason, free will or no free will, completely irrelevant. What matters is you are aware of the expectations. You are taking that path out of your from will, wherever the will comes from. And I think that kind of sets the stage for obligation. And when we use obligation as a phenomenon, when we interpret it as a phenomenon and we describe it in everyday language, I don't think it's controversial to say, oh yeah, there's an obligation, there's a legal obligation to do X or Y. That's a completely sensible, phrase that's dropped all the time.
Help me distinguish in your example.
Mhm.
Help me distinguish between the person who the kind of obligation that you're talking about, and maybe the contractor who just doesn't want to have his license suspended or avoiding a fine or something. I'm having trouble with that.
Because the point is what, because in both cases it's actually obligation still, right? Because because it's not that.
You're right back.
So he's still obligating himself.
Right. Well, it's not. No, he's not, and that's where I'm going. The obligation is being set by those standards, by the law, where it differentiate the point. The different point of differentiation.
Wants to do something else, and he does that anyway. Isn't he obligating himself because he wants to avoid a fine or a suspended license or something?
That may be his justification for acting in that way, right? That is his motivation. But the obligation, I think, is if you think of it like a kind of a causal arrow in a sense, is coming from the other direction. It's right because he can also choose not to do that, right? He can say these are the standards that I require for my license, but I bet if I cut these corners, no one's going to notice, and it's going to be okay. And then he's actually caught, and then he gets his license.
Okay, so you've added a new factor in. Nobody's going to notice.
Well, it doesn't matter that that's his reason. The point is he follows them. He doesn't follow them. He was aware of the standards. That's what matters. He was aware of the standards. He was aware that these were expected of him. He was aware that, and then he acted in such a way where those standards would be relevant and come into play. That's what matters. What his ultimate decision to follow those standards or not relevant. Free will, not relevant. So, and from a legalistic perspective, I wish we had Allison here. I think a lawyer would argue also, ignorance of the law wouldn't matter either. The obligation is there because the law is there. But from a more philosophical stance, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
Well, I think the point you make, is fairly straightforward. I don't think we need a lawyer. The law creates the obligation. In
a sense,
so there's no doubt that there is an obligation there from a legal perspective because the law dictates that.
So if we transfer that over now to moral, right? So I think last time I was here, I also posited, because I think we were also discussing morality, interestingly enough, but I think I put forward the analog that a system of morality is kind of like a language, right? It can be different from place to place. It can evolve over time. And any two people who speak that language may have a slightly different understanding of the precise meanings of words. Their vocabulary might not be identical, but they speak the same language. They can communicate. And there are standards and rules of how the language still operates in general that enables them to communicate effectively. Similarly, I would argue a moral system could be seen as local to a group of people. You can call that group a tribe, a culture, whatever. But but there's this common standard within that local system of what societal expectations are, what you're expected to do, what you're expected not to do. There may not be a legalistic mode of enforcing that, but that those general expectations still exist. You're probably brought up understanding those expectations, and you may engage in behaviors.
The only thing is, like, when Bruno asked, are we morally obligated to help others? I think the question kind of assumes there would be some objective answer regardless of the society you're in, like some universal answer, whereas your definition says it depends on the society.
Yeah, and I think that's enables it, because I think it's important not to just have a binary answer, because if we have a binary answer, there's a universal or it's completely up to the individual, and that's not necessarily the only two options, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, to the answer of, is there a universal all the time, everyone has to help everyone else all the time, no matter what, I would say, I don't think there is. I don't think morality operates in that way. But
I think there is nuance there.
Mhm.
And for example, we don't know how many birds are in the air right now, but we can pretty much, we know that that is a specific number. It's not worth the effort to determine that number, but we know that it is a number, and we know that
it's falling.
Diet and exercise is good for you. We may disagree about the particulars, but good health is better than bad health. Being able to see is better than throwing acid in the eyes of people, but so everything can't be known. There has to be some nuance, but we do understand some general trends. We know, we can tell the difference between a healthy person and an unhealthy person. And maybe we don't know.
Actually, I don't know about that. That's kind of part. So there's some, I guess some factors are more objective than others.
Let me clarify that with some extremes. If somebody who looks like you is compared to somebody who weighs 700 pounds and smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day, we pretty much figure that person's not healthy and Michael is.
Well, what if I have some crazy mental disorder? What if I'm schizophrenic, or what if I'm having a mental?
We're talking more or less.
You can introduce all the other.
No, but I guess I'm not just trying. I guess what I'm saying is some factors are more measurable than others. So, like, I guess what I'm saying is
where the nuance is.
Yeah.
But
I guess
we
what I'm
all
saying,
know that there is such a thing as good health.
Yes,
I guess such a thing as poor health.
Poor health. Yes, I guess what I'm saying is,
but that's.
I guess what I'm saying is there could be things that are very important, but are also very hard to measure quantitatively. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and usually what we do is we exclude that from the decision variables.
That's what I'm saying. So when we do a study is always done, or studies are almost always done on things that can be quantitatively measured.
Right.
So whenever we make a decision, often we'll do lots of studies, we'll look at lots of data, we'll take the factors that we like, and we'll try to make the decision that drives those factors in the favorable direction. The thing is, there may be other factors that are difficult to measure quantitatively. And we don't know those factors that can't be measured easily. We don't know what direction those are going in. So the things that we can measure, we're improving, but we don't know what's happening to the things that we can't measure.
Absolutely. But having things that we can't measure should not be an excuse to not make a decision when a decision is needed.
Yeah.
And in the end, how do we judge if something is good or not? If we look at, well, does it work well enough, right?
Like,
and then we correct, and we
to use David's example, like, let's say, we're in middle school recess, and I'm trying to figure out who I want on my kickball team.
Kickball?
I'm new to the school. I don't really know anybody, but I was chosen as the captain because people were really nice. They're like, "Hey, this new kid should have a chance to be the captain of the team." And my goal isn't to be fair to everyone. My goal is to get the best people possible for my team.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
You should probably not choose me. I don't know the rules.
I don't know that, right? I don't know that. I'm just looking at people. I don't know who
one
knows.
guy's big. One guy looks big.
I don't know who has certain mental capacities, but I do know that Michael looks a lot faster than that 700-pound guy. And I'd much rather take my bet on Michael being sufficiently healthy and sound of mind than taking my bet on the 700-pound guy, because he may be sound of mind, but he's still not going to move very far. I don't know him, and maybe he's not sound of mind either. Maybe he also has other problems, right? So there is still, even though I can't maybe say an overarching thing for certain about, yes, Michael is healthier than that other guy, but the factors that I can tell, that I can see, can still serve as a useful predictor.
Yeah, so you're saying control the things you can control, and the things that you can't, well, you just can't control them.
Yeah,
so that's
you try to make the best use of the information that you have. Which
is,
right?
I think the only thing with that, so there's the things we can measure, the things we can do in studies. Then there's the things that are really difficult to measure and that it's hard to put them in a study, right? So we take the things that we can study, we look at the different decisions we can make and what would improve those in the directions we want, and we make those decisions, and we're not really sure the other things, how it affects it, but we're trying to control what we can control, right? That's kind of the mindset. There's only one thing I have with that, and the only thing I have with that is that often societies sort of evolve to optimize themselves over time. So a lot of times the things that are difficult to measure, the society may have kind of optimized those in some way, albeit not perfectly. So when we change the other factors, we may not know. I guess I think it's a good idea. Like if there's something really obvious, like someone's really sick, and we give them this medicine, and now they're much better. I think it's very, very clear in that situation the better option, right? But when it's less cut and dry, it's like, well, doing this will help this factor a little bit, but like not take someone who's about to like really sick and all of a sudden make them really healthy. But if we make a decision that it has a very minor effect on the things we can control, maybe it'll have a bigger effect on the things that we can't measure as well, if that makes sense.
Well, there's always things that we don't know and we can't measure. And there are learned people who promote preposterous ideas that look preposterous to us now. But within a week of the Wright brothers' flight, a notable scientist published an op-ed that said powered flight would never be possible.
Well, I guess here's my point. Here's the best words I think I could put it in. If the benefit of the decision is small, there's a reason to have bias towards conservatism. If the benefit is large, then move ahead with the decision.
And we should always debate that.
Yeah. Well, if something has a small benefit, we shouldn't say go ahead with it because there's a small benefit. There's a reason to have bias towards conservatism in some cases. Yeah.
You have to balance out the benefits with the costs, but unless you're really thinking in net benefits.
But sometimes sometimes you might have like a small benefit, but you might not know the other costs. It might be hard to, if the benefit's small, it might be good to have a bias towards conservatism.
Sure.
It's also worth mentioning the degree of certainty. I think I do agree with what you're saying, Michael. Also, degrees of certainty is also important there, because if the potential benefit, if the benefit's high, but it's only a potential benefit, and then what that potential is will matter too. So, for example, someone proposes a new model for the entire economy that, if he's right about his model, would mean everybody's happy forever. Everyone has what they need forever. It's perfect if he's right.
Yeah.
Great potential benefit there. Very difficult to measure the probability that he is right, actually. And
the potential benefit is debatable.
Right. And if he's wrong, the results could be catastrophic. So there comes a point between how certain do you need to be before you're willing to take drastic action versus incremental action.
Now, Matthew, let me just ask you, since you're talking, go a little bit meta again, and tell us what's your conclusion, because I think I'm not so sure if you're able to finish before. We can establish legal obligations, but can we establish moral obligations at all, or not?
I think we can, yes, in a contextual way, where it's not an actual universal everyone is all the time to everyone, but in the sense that not objective moral obligations. Not objective in that sense, no.
Okay.
I would say, but subjective to perhaps other factors which may ultimately indirectly be objective. If I were to use a physics comparison, right, the force of gravity is subjective to the mass of the object.
Right. I mean, it's
right. So the law is objective. Whatever that relationship is objective, but the variables that you enter in differ widely, and this would be a very complex equation because you're dealing with human minds and societies and the environment that they're interacting with. You're dealing with millions, if not more, variables. Okay, so how I don't know if anyone here believes that we are at all capable of generating a moral obligation of any sort, objective or subject. How would we even go about doing that? In this case, help others. So how could we go back and say, well, because it's easy to say you have a legal obligation to help others, right? I mean, there's a lot of legal codes that is something that you are in some circumstances legally obligated to help others if you see yourself in certain situations. But that is easy to establish because the law says so. The law is creating the obligation. Well, the legislator and who was elected in the first place is creating that obligation through the law. But morally, it's a lot trickier. The religion is also not that complicated because God creates the obligation, and the obligation is stated in the Bible or the Torah or the Quran or whatever it is. And it's read by the priests, taught by the religious school. So you always have a chain of causation that creates these obligations.
morally though, and this is why this is always a big problem for me, is that it's very hard to establish that.
But from someone's experiences, like, and I'm kind of hypothesizing here, but like growing up in an environment, let's just simplify thing. Let's say it's isolated and you're with the small town or your tribe or whatever, right? You're with like 1,000 other people, and your parents raised you to tell you, this was right, this is wrong, and everyone you interact with says this is right and this is wrong. And it's usually pretty consistent. It doesn't really matter that you're going to church and having a priest tell you that. It doesn't really matter that you're opening a book and the book, that everyone's reading tells you that. So long as if everyone who you're interacting with seems to be on the page that these are the expectations, well, in this very simplified laboratory society, is very easy to say that yes, these obligations exist. It doesn't have to have a chain, that you can direct towards. This is the origin, right? It's just very clear that those expectations exist somehow.
And I think in your example, then the obligation exists because it is what is expected of you by the society you live in.
Isn't there a different? I think that's a good point. But isn't there a difference between social expectations and a moral obligation, or even social obligation, if you want to go that far, and a moral obligation? Isn't that a different thing?
I think the social obligation grows out of the moral obligation.
I think what Matthew
you have the social
earlier,
obligation because you have a group of people who more or less agree on what is good and bad. And so then it becomes a social obligation. And a legal obligation, if the legal system is functioning as it should, then the law should reflect the ethical or moral precepts of the society. So you can't really separate in the end the legal from the moral obligation. I mean, you have a moral obligation to write laws, enact laws that are consistent with your beliefs. And again, it's when we say a moral obligation, I think of it in terms of obliged by yourself, by your own conscience. And that's what I think where moral obligation really comes from. But I would kind of try to think about if we switch the question slightly, instead of saying, are we morally obliged to help people who need help? Can I ask, is society better off if we oblige people to help other people?
Yeah, I like that. Should we pressure people to help other people, kind of?
Yeah. Should there be a social, societal
expectation?
Pressure? Yeah, expectation.
People accountable.
Yeah, and I say yes, and I don't know if this was driven by the news about that woman who was being raped in a subway car, and nobody did anything to lift, not even press the emergency button. And I think one person was actually taking a cell phone video of the crime while it was, being committed.
Was this recent news or a historical thing?
Yeah, just 2 weeks ago, I think. And yeah, so I would pose that question: is society better off if we make it an obligation to come to people's aid?
I think you might be right, but I think as much as pressure, we have to persuade.
Yeah, pressure through persuasion.
And we can make all kinds of laws to pressure people into behaving as we think they should.
Right.
But we still have to persuade.
As I said, a legal system that's functioning properly will have to be consistent with what people believe are is wrong, right or wrong. And unfortunately, we don't ever find people in complete agreement, even if they belong to the same society, even if they grew up in the same family and the same, but we try to do the best that we can.
So I wanted to go back. So sorry, I'm still kind of on this rabbit hole, but back on the idea of things with small benefits. So like, yeah.
Yeah, let's maybe we can do 10 more minutes. Would
Sure.
that be okay? All right, let's.
Okay.
We have about 10 minutes, Mike. Go ahead.
Okay. So let's say you find, this is just hypothetical. Let's say you find that eating carrots is good for your eyes, right? And you do a study, and there's a lot of people in the study, and you find that people who eat carrots are 20% less likely to need glasses, right? So you have lots of data backing it up. It's very clear. It's just made up, right? It's not true, right? I'm just making it up, right? Totally made up, right?
All right.
So then you make a law, and you say certain food manufacturers are required to put a certain amount of carrots in their food. And let's say it's really cheap. Let's say it's even really cheap for them to do that. So it's not. Let's say I guess it's like you can measure the benefits of that. Like you have your study, you've proven that it's better for people's eyes. You don't think it's very costly to put the carrots in the food, but it's not. So it's the benefit is kind of clear, but the cost, like what that does, is not very clear. In other words, it's not clear. Like I would not be in favor of making that law because it's not really clear what the cost may or may not be. Yeah. Even though the benefit's clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like you're improving the thing that you can measure very well, but you don't really know what the downside would be. If that makes sense.
Yes, that always works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
there's the cost. It's the cost is the resistance of the manufacturers is going to say, it's not worth doing this, So,
well, but let's even say it's really cheap for them to do it, right?
Say, for the sake of argument, free.
Yeah. Let's even say it's free. Yeah.
Somehow.
So maybe
then they won't mind, right?
Or what?
Then they won't mind.
But could there be other consequences to your health that weren't part of that measurement? I think that's kind of where Mike was coming from. Like, yes, everyone's eyes will get better, but maybe their hair will turn orange.
Yeah. Well, like we can measure the benefit, but we can't measure the cost. That's the problem.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If there's that uncertainty, then
But I feel like there's a lot of things like that. Like for example,
COVID-19.
Or COVID-19. It's very clear that like there's a really big benefit to getting vaccinated, right? Or like, but
to you and me, but not to everybody.
But not to everybody. But there's like a lot of things where, like, let's say we switch from a textbook to a CD. It's clear the benefit. You don't have to carry your textbook everywhere. It's not clear like there's a lot of things where the benefit is a lot clearer than the cost. Yeah.
Well, see, in your carrot example,
yeah.
What you're really saying is that the cost. There's one thing to say that we don't know if there's a cost, and another thing to say that there is a cost, but we don't know how large it is.
We may not know if there's any cost, and we may not know how large. We may not know either.
Yeah. If I don't know,
or like
it's just that it's in the real world. I tend to think that there is very rarely a case where you can say we don't know if this
Well,
has
I
a
think it's
cost or
often
not.
where we don't know the cost, or we don't know if,
No,
Yeah.
where you don't know the cost, and you don't even know in what way that cost will manifest itself.
I think there's a lot of things like that. Like for example, being indoors more. Well, actually, we kind of have a better idea of the
Yeah.
cost of that,
Yeah,
like fresh air, or
Right.
like
Comes with time.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That I can't
But-
think of a real world situation
But
where
like,
that's really the case. Where
I think that understanding comes with time, though, right? Like certain things, it's not that certain things might be completely unable to be understood.
Yeah.
But like it's the more so that some things are more complicated than others. You know, so you may have a very clear metric that, like,
Right.
for example, with the carrots, let's say, yeah, you know, that the eyesight increase, you know, happens almost immediately. But then let's say that it ends up creating, you know, increasing cancer rates, but those cancer rates don't show up until decades later,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
but then that's just pure speculation. If you don't know,
Right.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, and you can't make a decision
You're
based
adding
on.
something that might happen years
Yeah.
down the road.
But
to
You
an
can't make a
example.
decision based
That's
on,
the entire point,
you know.
right.
So you just set it aside and don't put
Right.
it in your.
right?
You know.
Right, like I'm not saying, I don't think Michael is either. Sorry, I don't want to take it over, but what Michael's thing is, but like,
So let me make sure I understand. Are you saying that unless we know everything that could possibly happen, we shouldn't do anything?
absolutely.
No, I'm saying if the benefit is small
Okay,
enough.
well, that's what I heard you say.
No. I'm saying if the benefit is small enough, we should have a bias towards conservatism.
Oh yeah.
So like the carrots example, is the benefit that great? Not really. Don't do it.
But
Yeah.
but Matthew's
absolutely.
saying we might not know if the value is small or big for years.
No, we may not know the consequences. We can say for certain there is a small value to doing it right now. That's
Right.
kind of his saying. But like, so basically what is being done is, you know, there's always going to be a risk in everything we do. There's going to be a risk the next time I step outside my house. That's always going to happen, right? I could do endless speculation about that, but there's kind of, you know, so it's a risk versus reward. And the problem is I can't actually tell you what the risk of me stepping outside of my house will have in the moment versus, you know, 50 years from now. I can't give you that kind of number.
Right.
It's kind of something that's said, okay, there's risk that exists, but it's probably smallish, or, you know. But
are you thinking in terms of black swan events then? That type of calculation, that type of whatever you call it, thinking.
maybe I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the term. I'm familiar with black swan, but not in terms of a black swan event.
It's something that has a probability of happening, but you can't construct a probability distribution.
You can actually construct the actual number, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I look at, okay, if something, but when I decide to do that thing, I measure the potential benefits. Now my sense of going outside my home, the risks seem very, very, very small, and not quantifiable, but incredibly small. So the amount of benefit for me to engage in that action doesn't have to be that high. You know, I don't have to incentivize me with $1 million to make me leave my house.
Sure.
You can incentivize me with just saying, hey, let's hang out and grab a beer together. That's good enough for me. Well, maybe not a beer. I don't like beer, but like that, like that's sufficient incentive to me. That's worth the risk. But we're talking something like, you know, a medical, you know, some sort of a mandate that carrots are included in everything. Well, let's not actually say carrots, because carrots have been around for a while. Probably better said. So understood. Let's say someone discovers a new berry from a plant that's never been discovered before. And they found this correlation, right? And no, there's so much we don't know about this berry yet, right? That from a sense of mandating that everybody start consuming this berry, the perceived risk, still unquantifiable, is still.
Or just making it legal to consume the berry. Or just making it legal to consume the berry. Maybe it's not legal yet to consume it, but we know it's good for your eye. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, then that is different. Like I would like that just so well, that goes more into, you know, I think a little bit perceptions of freedom and authorities and things like that. But which still is a relevant calculus to some extent. But from the perspective of, you know, what's the risk, strictly a risk reward, you know, of implementing this policy. You know, if we know for a fact that this berry, everyone who consumes it, like in every single trial, everyone who's had cancer, their cancer goes away, gone forever, right? Probably worth whatever risk, especially for people who have severe cases of cancer. We don't know what the risk is, but hey, cancer sucks pretty bad. Curing it's really nice. We'll say it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Or people saying, hey, you get a 3% increase of the eyesight, everyone should do it. If no one else knows anything about this berry, it seems like the risk versus reward is different. Again, we can quantify one and not the other. And I think that's what Michael is coming down to is one is quantifiable, one is not. We may still have a sense of very roughly of this is low risk, medium risk, high risk, which may affect how we do that calculus. But you know, for
I like that example. Yeah.
All right. Let me try to end this. Maybe we can end with the poll today, you know, so we have a little bit of closure. So maybe we can just answer the question, you know, are we morally obligated to help others? And we can see if more, you know, what are our final thoughts after the discussion are, and maybe we can revisit that in similar conversations in the near future. Carolyn, what do you think? Maybe let us know first.
Oh boy, I guess it's complicated. Like we already talked about.
Well, I know we just talked about for 2 hours.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we have one yes. Carolyn says yes.
Yeah.
And I have an answer that I like based on what Matthew said.
Yeah.
On an individual level, well, it's all just subjective. It's whatever everyone wants. On an objective universal level, there's no such thing as an obligation. On a societal level, definitely yes. Societies push us to help others.
So which one has more weight?
The society.
The society.
Yeah.
So it'd be yes.
So yes.
Okay. And David, what do you think?
Yes.
Yes. Just a simple yes. Okay. What about well, whoever wants to go first, Raul or Matthew?
I'd say yes, but I'd qualify it even further that we are not only more morally obligated, it's actually we should be morally obligated to
that's
help
going,
one another.
Just going back to your question,
meaning,
right?
Yeah, meaning we should raise our kids to believe that they should help people who need help, and we should try to persuade other people in an effective way. You know,
we are obligated to promote obligation.
Yes, to promote that obligation.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. What about you, Matthew?
It depends, but yes, it can. My Michael more or less reiterated my point. So yes.
No. What the question? Are we morally obligated to help others?
Sometimes.
What do you mean sometimes?
Sometimes it depends on the context.
Sometimes depends on what?
Society.
So it depends on the society you're in.
Whether or not that society generates an obligation, yes.
So if the society thinks you're obligated, then you are obligated,
right,
essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about in your society?
Yes.
Yes.
So if your society thinks it's okay to have slaves, it's okay to have slaves?
To the person who's a slaveholder, I'm going to try to stop them though, because that's not my society, right? It's not. I'm not going to view them in an isolated pockets and be like, you do your thing, I'll do my
No,
thing.
no, no. I'm talking about societies of the past
Sure.
who felt like having slaves was good.
In terms of, an abstract metaphysical obligation, sure.
Yeah, as long as the slaves also agreed that being enslaved is okay with them.
Good luck.
So I'm looking for a society that thinks that way, where the slaves
There's
think,
also,
it's perfectly moral for me to be a slave.
Yeah. There's also the question of who do you include in the societal calculus? Because if you're including every human who exists
in the answer.
The region, well then I would agree that then no, there's going to be plenty of people who will say this is bad, and there's going to be a conflict that's going to come ahead sooner or later. But
so why do you say that in your society you think people are morally obligated to help others?
Because that's, I say that because I was raised to, because most of the people I interact with day to day say this, act that way. It's behavior I see repeated. It's it ends up.
American society is very individualistic, though. I guess that would be a nuanced, complicated question, but
I would also say, in a moral context, the United States is too diverse to label as one moral society. It is much more morally alike within the United States than they are to, say, China. But
so you're thinking more about the context of the Midwest, the moral context of the Midwest. That would be a good title for some essay.
I grew up around, and I interact with the day-to-day basis. I think that's a separate kind of conversation, but that's kind of the challenge of the modern era, is where brains are kind of hardwired to exist in these tribal societies where we're around roughly the same people our entire lives. And we are now in a society where we have mass communication and we're traveling everywhere. We're meeting new people constantly and new ideas constantly, which is, you could argue the merits or demerits of that, but it is certainly not how we evolved to interact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna say no. We're not obliged to help others because it would be very boring if this ended as a unanimous decision. So I'm gonna say no.
And
but it's very complicated.
Yeah.
I say that's because Bruno's thinking on the more universal level. So on a universal level, nothing is really an obligation. But yeah.
This is very challenging to me. I think we need to have several of these conversations so I can keep bringing the conversation. It will be very boring for everybody watching, but I'm just very puzzled by this, how we can justify that something is actually a moral obligation.
Can you imagine a world?
For me, it's easily justifiable if you can say that it's good for society.
Well, and I like your answer, but I don't. It's not quite at this point. It's not convincing to me. So I'm going to press you. I'm going to press you on that.
Sure.
So I want you to convince me.
Well,
because we're going to need to do some work.
Yeah. No. Do we still have time, or are we closing?
I don't think we have time for that. I think we need like 5 hours. But but we have time for you can end the podcast, Raul.
I guess it all depends on where you think morality comes from. Is it something that basically we create as thinking sentient beings, or is it something that's out there even without us to think and to reflect upon it? Is there, and I tend to think morality is basically man-made. Doesn't mean it's that, to me, doesn't devalue it. It's just that it's something we create, and in the end, morality has to be evolutionarily adaptive for it to
Well, my
to be moral.
I agree with you. The problem for me is that if I create it, it's hard for me to follow it. You know, like I do not have like the authority to obligate myself. That's the problem, you know, as a man.
Yeah.
That's why, you know, God obligating me, I'm cool with.
It's
You know,
almost very
the
satisfying.
law
Like,
obligating me, I'm cool with, but like myself obligating, that creates a real problem.
How about me? How can I obligate you?
No, but you can't obligate me either. That's the problem. You need
Why
the
not?
authority because you don't have the authority.
How about the authority of conscience?
Just everyone can just grant me the king of philosophy, and now
Yeah.
you're obligated to me. And
Maybe if you were Socrates, then we could talk. If you're Socrates, we could talk.
let's let me be the philosopher king, and all your problems.
You gotta earn it.
Right and what is wrong?
You gotta earn it.
About it anymore.
Tonight you gotta start writing your dialogues. You know, like you gotta earn this.
Bruno, you are obligated to help others. I said so. You are obligated to me.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think we're gonna have to work on that. We're gonna have to work on that.
But maybe that's
But look,
a lot of the satisfaction.
I'm just troubled by this question. I want to say yes, but yeah, I think it's hard to like prove moral obligations. I think it's very hard. I mean,
maybe that's why,
because if you ask me, should we have laws that, you know, in some cases, you know, like we do, you know, that force you to help people in certain situations or encourage people. I mean, yeah, certainly. And also because of the answer to your question, Roel, I think it's pretty straightforward that yes, society is certainly better off if we encourage people to help others. You know,
and that's a good enough reason for me.
Well, good enough. But for me, it's more like an abstract question. Like if we're talking about practical stuff, like as a lawmaker, yes, definitely. But as a philosopher, then that's a different.
See, that's the downside of doing philosophy. If you didn't do philosophy ever, you'd say, of course we're obligated to help other people.
Very easy.
And then you start doing philosophy, you're like, wait a sec, are we? And now it's not satisfying anymore.
It's not
like before
satisfying.
Before you thought you were objectively doing the right thing.
Well, I object to the implication that philosophy ought not be practical.
Yeah.
No, I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying that, you know, if we were in a practical setting, like if we're defining, like if we're like voting on laws and stuff like that, then, you know, you need to look at the practical applications of things, and you need to look at what is going to favor society. But if you're looking at just the purely abstract philosophical question of like what obligates you, then I think it's a lot trickier.
Oh, we can go round and round and round forever with that, because
let me reiterate my opinion. Yes.
Yes. That's like the axiom.
I second that motion.
I like David's conviction. Like, it's just like, it's satisfying. It's like, it makes you feel like when you do something good for someone, like you're really doing the right thing, right?
Well, that is true.
There is a you know, that's already sort of proven in brain studies that there's a reward of being good, of doing good, and knowing that you did something good.
Well, you feel great. You certainly feel great.
Yeah. I mean, the reward centers of the brain just light up, you know. And
it's true.
And again, that's an evolutionary adaptation, and you know,
it seems not totally related. Like, they're not totally the same thing. Like, is it good to help others versus are you morally obligated to help others? Because it can be a good thing without you necessarily being morally obligated to do it.
That is a good discussion. And I've heard this before, what is the difference between something being good and something being an obligation? Can something be good to do but not an obligation?
If it's only good for you.
Well, yeah, because I'm saying like in this very case, you know, you don't need to go very far. I'm saying like what Raul is saying is true. Like in my opinion, I would certainly argue that how did he put it? Society is better off if you encourage people to help others, you know, when they need help. I think that's I certainly think that's the case. But so that's a good thing. Now, does that equate to you're morally obligated? No, I don't think that equates to that you're morally obligated. Those are different things. You can prove a connection. Raul seems convinced that you can prove the connection.
I think you're morally obligated because it's a good thing.
Exactly. I was gonna say that. Yeah.
I don't know.
Like something that's
I think they're different.
yeah, like
You
something
know?
that's good but you're not obligated to do would be like you're going above and beyond.
Right.
But are you obligated to do your best at doing the best? Are you obligated to do your best at doing whatever good things you can do?
No.
No.
I go back to an obligation somewhat stemming from expectation, right? Now, a legal obligation is the expectation as outlined in law. I would say the moral expectation is the expectation as, outlined by a moral society. But
That's a society, yeah.
Yeah, but as I said, my response to that is if the legal obligation, if the legal system is functioning properly, then the law should reflect the moral precepts of that society.
But the point I'm trying to make is that it's based on expectation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can do, and there are things which may be perceived as good, which aren't expected.
And that's the
So, it is expected, not by, well, I guess yes, by law. That's a bad example. It is expected that, yes, by law, but even without law, we generally would expect our teachers. Okay, I'm going to go back. Not by law. We expect our teachers to be engaged in the classroom and teach our students as best as they can in the classroom, right? The law might not really require that they do their best, but we do hold them to a certain standard that during the class they do their best to teach our kids. We do not really expect that they be available on the weekends, that they be available for hours after the school day expires to help our kids. That's not an expectation, but is a good thing for them to do in the capacity of a teacher to perform that way? Absolutely, it is. It does further the education of our kids, but it's not an expectation that we have. And we don't say that, oh, this teacher didn't stay for hours after class, they're a bad teacher, right? So they're not obligated to do that, but it's still absolutely something we can consider to be a good thing.
Maybe it's not good. So maybe it's bad because it's at the expense of their family and their own sanity.
Oh my God, Michael, you keep muddying the waters.
What we're really talking about is not a teacher giving the extra effort. We're talking about the Good Samaritan situation where somebody needs help urgently at that moment. And
Sure. Where things are obligated, they're good, right?
Yeah.
And so where you're, of course, tautologically, whenever you say you ask, is this good action an obligation? When that action is necessary and expected, well, then yes, by definition, it is. Right. Like it is, but that I think sidesteps the question of if it's possible for any act for there to be an action which is good but not an obligation, which is where simpler things.
And just to finish, I mean, I think it's important to highlight. We are having a conversation that we're trying to be like philosophical, right? Like as philosophical as possible. And that is not a normal conversation to have, like in a society level, like most people do not have this type of conversation. So we're talking about concepts, we're not talking about like what we want for society, what we want to see in society, so it's really just a matter of like looking at the concepts and trying to look at them, as logically as possible. So it's important to think about like answers like mine in that light.
Yeah,
it's not
and I don't know if this is related, but
it's not a social media discussion as such.
If we have,
even though it is on social media.
5 more minutes. Peter Singer makes this argument that if you are willing to ruin a $200 suit to save a child that's drowning. What if somebody tells you that with this $200 you can save, I don't know, 10 children from starving to death, or maybe even just one child from starving to death? And he's saying, well, then if you're willing to do that and sacrifice your $200 suit, then it's the same thing mathematically to donate $200 to some kid in the third world and save him or her from dying of starvation. But it seems that most people view those situations differently, you know, and I don't have an answer to that. I'm just posing that.
Well, you know,
That's
that
something to
that would
think
be that's a good idea for the future discussion, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe not such a long discussion, but it's
My
we
closing
could
remark-
open with that.
My closing remark is that I'm totally confused by this conversation.
We're more wired to help people
that's-
close. Sorry, I'm sorry.
That's
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say that's probably a good thing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Michael. Sorry.
I was gonna say, yeah, we're more wired to help people closer to us than farther away,
yes,
for better or worse.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a proximity thing going on there, and
Yeah.
also looks like me thing, and a lot of other things.
Well, it's natural. I mean, you wouldn't be able to live your life if you didn't
No.
have that, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
especially today. I mean, there's 7 billion people in the world.
Right.
You can't think about 7 billion. Like,
Right.
yeah, you have to think
Exactly.
about it in a very macro level, but you can't talk
Yeah.
about 7 billion people individually.
Yeah.
If you try, you'll probably go crazy,
Hmm. Yeah.
literally. So
And,
I
and
mean,
that's a cost that will stop you from, you know,
the brain
in the
trying
cost
to
benefit
think that way.
analysis, right? That's
So let's continue this conversation. I think you all have a moral obligation to persuade me that of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Let's